Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion. This one is going to be my, top 10 ideas for future Avatar and Korra novels going forward. So this was a Patreon suggested topic by one of my new patrons, Cash D's, and so the topic requested was obviously this. Some sort of a top 10, 8, 5, however many, I felt I could put together, and so I thought this was a good idea. I've discussed stuff like future story ideas that I want, but for the novel specifically, and then I don't think I've ever done it directly like a top 10 list type thing, where I've literally done, I'm going to do 10 ideas. So I thought that was pretty good. I asked for, what suggestions would they have, and, what was interesting is that when I got the list back, my list was very, very similar to the list, messaged to me. And I think that just highlights that I think for the most part the fandom is on the same page when it comes to these are the types of stories that we would want going forward in the novels. The Kyoshi novels have really, opened the door to what we can do with the franchise going forward. And I think everyone who has read these books immediately has that sense for please announce more. This is Avatar the way we wanted it for quite some time. It feels like if there's anywhere where they can tell a lot of different stories, it probably is more here than in the comics. The comics seem somewhat locked into the types and settings of stories that they can take place in, but immediately the fact that it's Kyoshi novels that are the first thing with the Avatar novels, I think tells you that they could do much more with them. So that's what we're going to be talking about here in the list. Now, I have come up with a top 10. It's not in order. It's literally just 10 ideas. So don't treat this as being any way in order. That's why I'm going to do it sort of 1 to 10 rather than in reverse. There's no particular importance placed on number 1 over 10. It's just 10 different ideas. So let's jump straight in with the idea of, okay, the first idea should be obviously more Kyoshi novels. The first 2 were great, but people do immediately want more. Because the ending of Shadow of Kyoshi, while good, was not the most satisfying thing. It definitely still leaves big aspects of Kyoshi's life uncovered. We just don't know anything about that stuff. We know she lives to 230 years old. We now know how that is possible, but we still don't see any of that extended life or what the character is like when she is that old. We know a few of the other key events in her life with the Qin the Conqueror stuff and the peasant uprising in Ba Sing Se, but those are pretty, those are topics that are covered in not too much detail when they are presented to us, especially the Qin the Conqueror stuff. Again, you have to remember that in Avatar Day, it's almost presented as being a somewhat comedic thing because Qin is sort of made fun of at the same time as he's presented as basically being a Kuvira level threat to the Earth Kingdom. And there's still so many questions you have about why did Kyoshi hold back and only tackle Qin when he came after Yokoya? Why did he wait that long? Or why did she wait that long? And they set up the whole, clan of Qin in the first Kyoshi novel because we went to Qin village basically. But they didn't do any direct setup for Qin himself outside of the fact that the people of Qin have a loyalty to their own village more so than the Earth Kingdom, as being like, oh yeah, if there was someone to rise up, it probably would be from here. But outside of that very vague setup, they haven't actually moved to make that happen. And there's a clear setup from the Shadow of Kyoshi that they need to cover Kyoshi and how she's going to tackle her home nation, the Earth Kingdom, going forward. We haven't seen her meet the Earth King, whether it is the 46th Earth King who is in charge at this point or the 45th one, and we'll see her transition to dealing with one into the next one. We're not entirely sure. The 46th Earth King is quite old, I think, when you see him, so it more than likely is the case that even this younger Kyoshi from the novels, it probably still is the 46th Earth King that's in charge. So her getting to meet him, have their first issues and so on, would be something actually quite good to see. And once they create some sense of a story behind it, I think there's definitely stuff for them to do. And I probably would do early Chin the Conqueror setup. Maybe do a bit of a time skip here to where it's closer to that time, but maybe not quite ready. Because obviously it must have taken at least a year or two or more for Chin to actually take over so much of the place. And just the whole scenario surrounding that, and that you get the impression that Kyoshi holds back to some degree because no one likes the Earth King, that the Earth King has always been this sort of problematic position based on how most of the Earth Kings have been presented to us. So Kyoshi being Dao Fei and being anti-leader basically would probably be like, if the people want Chin, who am I to stop them? And only when she properly hears about potentially just the bad stuff that he's doing does she move to step in. But there's a lot of specifics that, you know, should be delved into. And then I think everyone does want to see the stuff from later on in their life with regards to Coco. Is Coco adopted, or does Kyoshi actually give birth to Coco? And if so, like, who's the father? And all these sort of questions come up. Are they going to stick with the idea that Coco is canon or not? Because obviously we're going to have a situation where Kyoshi outlives Rangi, but, you know, at that point, is she even able to have kids? The idea, I suppose, of Lao Ge's technique and the fact that she can sort of lock herself into a sort of specific era of her life would imply that she could actually have had a child when she was like over 100 or over 200 years old. Because they don't imply that the way that the technique works is that Kyoshi gets to say like 30 years old, holds that position, ages a little bit more, holds that position. No, she has to choose like one version of herself to sort of lock in, as she can remain sort of stagnant for as long as she wants in that position. So I'm guessing the Kyoshi that we see in Avatar is the Kyoshi that she locks herself in as, which is probably 30, 40-year-old Kyoshi. And we'll probably have to see that happen at some point. I'd like to see her decision making around that moment, and, you know, to see what happens, especially, as I said, later on in her life, how she deals with the whole Dai Li stuff, and, you know, what leads her to making the decision to stop doing the meditation technique to maintain her life. And in that they basically imply you can live for as long as you want, so she makes a decision to not live any further than 230. So there's definitely still, you know, ideas for Kyoshi novels. Probably not what we'll go to next. I definitely think most people would like to see maybe something new before we go back to Kyoshi, but Kyoshi should remain on the table. Number 2 idea here is a unique era, whether that be an ancient avatar, but basically for me, I want a third pillar to be a novel series about a time period that we don't know anything about. And I think this is probably key to the franchise thriving going forward, is to utilize the novels and what you can do with them. And in my mind, what I would do here is I'd probably pick either one of the earliest avatars or an avatar right in the middle of everything that we have so far. So say, like, set 5,000 years before, like, Korra. So we're maybe not quite in beginnings time, but we're also not in the modern era. So we're in that sort of like mixed time period that we actually don't know anything about pretty much, because we know avatars up to like a certain point in the past, and then we know avatars from like the origin point a certain bit close. But that middle like 1,000 or so years, we really don't know anything about. So that could be a spot to set stuff in, or just the era after Wan. And it could even be Wan, or the second avatar, third avatar, fourth avatar, fifth avatar. They're all very interesting. The second avatar, just because how did they adapt to like just immediately being born, but only being the second of this kind of thing, and having no sense really for what the full duty is. And I think the same would be the case for the first 4 avatars. As the cycle goes around the first time, it's just like, okay, new nation, but what am I doing here? And then that 5th avatar, when the cycle comes back around the fire again, that's very interesting, because now there's a full cycle, there's a full sense of like it's repeating itself. the world will begin to know what's happening here. And you sort of wonder, at what point does the name Avatar properly come into play? But either way, the point that I'm making here is that something the novel should be able to do that will be a real accomplishment, I suppose, for the franchise is if they are able to put out a successful novel that is not about Aang, that is not about Korra, and is not about a character we learn about in Avatar or Korra. It's the Avatar universe, but characters you don't know anything about, set in an era you don't know anything about. How successful would a book like that be? I think hardcore fans would be all over that, because you suddenly don't have any of the restrictions that even like the Rise of Kyoshi, the Kyoshi novels would have, which the limitations here in my mind were clearly that FCE didn't want to write the story to get to the point where it's touching on the Qin the Conqueror stuff or the Peasant Uprising stuff. He sort of considered that story told, so he's telling early Kyoshi, but he doesn't want to get near that stuff. And you can see the same with some of the writers for the comics, of like they're a little bit cautious about writing in the gap between Avatar and Korra, and they feel more comfortable writing during Korra or like, during Avatar. So free that up completely, but open the door where like you can write whatever you want. Once it fits within the lore of Avatar, you're not rubbing up against any major continuity points because it's a whole new timeline. And then you can tell a really big, grand story. Whether you want your main character to be an Avatar again or someone else, you have the capacity through however many novels you want it to be. 1 novel, 2 novel, 3 novel, 10 novels, if you want to do a really big story. Just tell us a really unique story that can be that sort of third pillar, that can show us that we have ATLA, we have Korra, but we also have this like other era that the novels cover like really, really heavily. This is our third super main focused on Avatar is from the novels. And I think that would be really cool to just have that Avatar that is, oh yeah, the Avatar we know about from the novels. Rather than just, like Rise of Kyoshi does, mention a few new names and just quickly fill in some gaps. No. The full story of this Avatar in this thing. Because even, like I said, the Kyoshi stuff, they market this book on the basis that you know going in who Kyoshi is, but you want more depth on her. Can they do the same thing with just new Avatar, new time period? You don't know who this is. And that's a real telling point, for me at least. So that's what I really want. A third pillar for the franchise through the novels. Number 3, Air Nomad Genocide. I think at some point they have to decide to tell us the details of this event. We know some of it from the trading card game. I know a lot of people don't know about the trading card game, but through the characters of Malu, Apiko, and then what the cards also further cover with Monkey Yatso, they do actually tell you more of the details surrounding the genocide. That Apiko, the betrayer, is an air nomad who betrayed the air nomads and joined Sozin and like assisted the attacks on the air temples, assisted with the hunting down of the airbenders who survived, and was then executed later on in his life. Because if he betrayed one person, who's to say he won't betray another? So that story of like he thinks he got power by joining Sozin, but lost it because of the type of character that he was. And I know the trading card game for a lot of people is sort of questionable with regards to canon, but it remains a thing that the trading card game is the only thing that really covers information about the genocide. Otherwise, we just know about the vague details in the build-up to it from Avatar and the Fire Lord, which is just Sozin and post the death of Roku deciding to go after the airbenders because the next Avatar would be an airbender. That's the sole reason for that. That's why the attack is launched. But I think you could really tell a fascinating story by covering the air nomad perspective in the lead up to this. Like, Aang could be in the story as like a cameo role. Like Gyatso could be a focus and some of his scenes would be with Aang, but Aang wouldn't be the main character. And you'd properly, you know, I suppose we'd get full names for like all the elder monks, and we find out just the whole dynamic about why they tell Aang at that specific age, what they know is coming from the Fire Nation and what they don't know. Because of course they tell Aang because they know something is coming. But what is that? What do they hear about? And do they potentially not get the full story because they are a little bit more isolated and so on? That would be really great. And then maybe on the other side of the story, you have the Fire Nation perspective, and you delve deeper into Sozin's thoughts on starting a war, wanting to dominate the whole Earth and so on, and potentially like explore stuff like, does he regret leaving Roku to die at all? Or is it just, I have to get rid of the Avatar? I'd love to see what the character is actually like. Like he mentions that he basically wasted away the remainder of his life searching for the Avatar, but day to day, what did that look like? Was he having like an Azula level breakdown, just like we still haven't found the Avatar, or was it more relaxed about it? That's what I really want to know. And like I suppose you could have like a young Azulon be in it as well and set up his approach and him stepping into the role as well, if you go into sort of the aftermath of this as well. But I think the main thing would just be to cover the details of tactically how the attack was actually planned out. We know the comet was used, but like, you know, was that the full thing? Was it literally just, we have power because of the comet, we'll just attack all the air temples? Was it a simultaneous attack on all 4 temples at the same time, or not? Were the dragons used to help get up to the mountains where all the air temples are? Because otherwise they seem very difficult to get to without flying methods. I'm not going to assume that like Aang saying like you have to use a flying bison to get to the temples is like fully correct. I'm assuming there is some level of like a secret pathway, and you could explore this sort of stuff. Like, how does the Fire Nation get such an edge on the airbenders that they successfully wipe out one of the nations, basically, apart from a bunch of escapees? How does that all go down? And I really would love to know how that happens. And I think this is potentially how you can cover how like the herd of bison ends up with the Bonte tribe. You could cover like Malu if you wanted to use the trading card game as some sort of a focus. Because honestly, at this point, writing that story, I'd kind of be like, yeah, it makes sense. You've basically created a dynamic where the Fire Nation shouldn't be able to get such an edge on the air nomads, just because even with the comet they should have trouble getting to the air temples full stop. So they would need insider knowledge to get in there secretly enough, and then you have all your fights take place and so on. So yeah, the character of Afiko or someone like him makes complete sense. So why not expand? Maybe retcon some of the stuff in the trading card game to do the full story, but use the idea of that character. Similarly, use the idea of Malu or some character who escaped and create an emotional story behind that character. Like the whole thing with Malu is that, like, she sort of implied she knew her parents and they were killed early on in the war and she had to go off on her own. She remained hidden for quite a while, but eventually decided to fight back. I think there's so much ground to cover with the Nomad Genocide, and I think just like a book about it, 2 books about it, I think would be really good to get, because it feels like it sort of writes itself. You have the Fire Nation perspective, the Air Nomad perspective, and I don't know, potentially you could hear about like the reaction of the other nations to finding this out, because from what we know, the air nomads are greatly respected across the world, even in the Fire Nation. So it must have been something that Sozin also had to deal with, the fact that, like, at the exact time, how much could he hide the fact that he has just committed like a full-on war atrocity here? Everyone knows the air nomads are nomads, they're peaceful, they're spiritual. It has to take quite a while for him to set up the whole situation of it becomes history in the Fire Nation that the air nomads had a formal military and they like provoke the Fire Nation to attack them, or whatever the histories say. So I think the Nomad Genocide is, you know, such a great ground to tell lots and lots of great stories, and the books feel like you can tell that stuff, you can get into the details, because visually you're not showing any of the devastation. Like, even looking at episode 103, when we see Gyatso's skeleton, you're almost shocked that 3 episodes into a new Nickelodeon series they showed that. But they did it. But we haven't come back to it since, so I'd like to see that, and the novels seem like the perfect place for it. Number 4, Red Lotus and White Lotus, exploration or backstory. So with the Red Lotus, this again seems to write itself. You have so many options to do something here. Xiaobao is part of the White Lotus, so you can maybe have a lot of the book be from Xiaobao's perspective, and the first section of the book is basically him as part of the White Lotus. We cover their ideals, their approach, what his issues are going forward, the situation surrounding why he leaves, how he creates the Red Lotus, and how he recruits the others into it. So the idea, I guess, is that before he dies, he probably, I guess, recruits Unalaq and Zahir in, and then Unalaq becomes the leader, then Zahir becomes the leader. And I suppose after the Xiaobao section of the book, it probably would have to switch to being more from the perspective of Unalaq, of Zahir, and the others. And I think that's what you need to do, is just kind of have it be that sort of just, you know, yeah, we're going to be skipping around characters quite a bit, but we're covering a very important thing for a lot of people, which is the backstory of these characters. What nation is Zahir from? How does he come to meet Unalaq and join up with the Red Lotus? Unalaq himself, like, how does he come into contact with them and so on? What's the whole situation here? But more importantly, in a way, the lesser developed characters, Pali, Minghua, Ghazan, what's their story? How are they brought into it? We're basically told with Pali what the situation there is, you know, warlord, so we're talking about a fire island, Zahir coming in to save her from this warlord. She's being used as like an assassin, basically. That's a powerful moment. Like, you obviously would tell Zahir's backstory first, then you cover him being involved in Pali's backstory. And my guess is that Ghazan and Minghua come in after that. But how are they brought in? What is their relationship with freedom prior to joining the Red Lotus? Again, with Minghua, it probably is maybe connected to Unalaq in some way, since they're both Water Tribe, and realistically, I suppose, are both from the Northern Water Tribe. How did Minghua being born without arms affect her? Was she not allowed to be trained? But then Unalaq actually maybe trained her. You know, where did her powers come from? Is that why freedom is an important thing to her? Ghazan being a lava bender, the whole being raised by an older sister point, that's really, really interesting. And what happened to their parents if he was raised by an older sister? It implies something happened to them. And then it also implies something happened to his older sister. So, that seems to almost write itself as well, of like he maybe has lost a lot of people potentially because of the Earth Queen at the time or whatever. That just seems to all come together, because the Red Lotus needs development, but the White Lotus also needs development, and just the covering the issues Xiaobao has with the White Lotus to why he forms the Red Lotus would reveal a lot of information, because the way it's explained in the show feels a little bit like, really? That's why you created a whole counter-organization, is just because they became public and you disagree with them becoming public and just serving the Avatar. Okay, but I almost feel like we don't know enough about the White Lotus full stop to explain why that is such a change in philosophy for them. Yes, we're aware it became weaker in Korra, but like, cover that. Cover what the issue is. Like, did they recruit the wrong people, and so it became weaker over time? Who is Xiaobao? Like, that's one of the things to do here, is just to utilize what you have there. Xiaobao as this borderline unknown character, but a character that Iroh knows. So Iroh could be in this story, and there might be an issue, disagreement between the two, a big betrayal happens. That could be very interesting. So that's a story I think everyone wants. 5 is, speaking of Iroh, Iroh backstory. I think the novels at this point seem like the go-to place for a story like that. just because the comics seem to very much want to focus on solely ATLA stuff and stuff that is sort of connected in some way to either series or Korra. So a backstory for one of our kind of older characters feels like more ground for a novel. And basically what this would have to be is more or less some sort of like an anthology just covering the key points during Iroh's life to fill in the gaps. And there's a lot you can do here. Immediately it would be Iroh and Ozai's dynamic, which we basically know nothing about. Cover that. What is both of their dynamic with their father? What's the issue like? And that it's heavily implied that Ozai had issues because he was the second born. But potentially that Iroh was maybe slightly a little bit jealous of Ozai because Ozai was maybe more like his father. Because we know, I suppose at this point, that Iroh was sort of always this way. He was never the full-on, like, successor to a Zulon or Sozin. He was never going to turn out that way. But Ozai very much was, and their more or less their issues between each other, their rivalries, sort of ruining their relationship as brothers. Then obviously them having their children, like, cover Iroh and Liu Ten. Liu Ten as a character, I think at this point, like, it feels like to me, like, whenever I watch something like, say, The Tales of Ba Sing Se, like, look, it's an emotional moment, like Iroh mourning the loss of his son, but it would have much more impact if we knew Liu Ten personally, if we had scenes of him talking to Iroh and not just this sort of, you know, Iroh has a son, basically, he is gone, that is the emotional connection. It still hits, but use a book like this to really develop, you know, what was Liu Ten like? Was he more like Iroh? Was he potentially going down that path of being more like, you know, a Sozin or an Azulon or whatever? What specifically happened to lead to his death at the siege of Ba Sing Se? Because obviously what happens is that they basically say the day he broke through the walls should be the most successful day of his life. That was the day also that Liu Ten was killed. So how did that happen? Did Iroh get a little bit arrogant and push forward too quickly after they broke through and that led to Liu Ten's death? Stuff like that, just to create the exact dynamic behind sort of why Iroh blames himself so much and so why he is so protective of Zuko later on. Very much needed. You know, his spirit world journey, like, you have to cover the details of that. When in his life he went to see the ancient sun warriors and was judged by the dragons. I'd love to see the details of that scene, and just what the character was like, because he was judged worthy, but we don't know exactly when in his life it was. Similarly, he goes to the water tribes and studies waterbenders, and from there develops the lightning redirection technique. That's a big moment, but, like, in what way does he study? Is it like a spying mission, or does he just visit the water tribes? And how does that work? You know, how does he find the time to do that when the war is on? There's a lot of questions like that. But there's just, with Iroh, there's enough details to where I think a story that does sort of skip through his life, you focus on one event for as long as you need to, but then you're absolutely willing to jump into the next, and just to create an order for all these different events for him and to put them fully into perspective, and then maybe frame it in the idea of, like, him telling his story just before he passes on into the spirit world. That would be, I think, just exactly what's needed. I'd really like to get that. I think everyone would be all on board for a full Iroh backstory. I think he's such a popular character that there's no question that it would sell well. It would. Number 6 here is basically stories involving some of the other avatars we know. So Kuruk, Yangchen, Roku, Salai, Zito, and the avatar that fights Hundun. I'm grouping these all together with the sense that I maybe don't quite see the ability to do like a long multi-book series for all of these avatars, but even if it was just sort of a short story collection where you just tell a couple of smaller stories about these avatars to get to know them a bit better. So with, say, Kuruk, who we know a lot better now, about the final thing that we need is probably just a more in-depth story connecting his life from after the duel with Glowworm to meeting Umi and beyond. Basically just that last chunk of his life that he refuses to talk about to Kyoshi with. I think you need to make a final point to connect those dots. And I feel at that point, Kuruk is almost complete as a character then. And you can, you know, just treat it as like, okay, any other story is going to be just a fun event from earlier in his life. Similarly with Yangchen, I feel like they've told us the core of her story through the old Iron stuff from the Rift and now what we've got now. That anything else is just going to be sort of just more detailed to an event we already know about, or kind of covering her own origin story as the Avatar. That it may not be the most interesting story to tell as like a 3-book series, considering she just goes on to be a great Avatar. But again, a short story may be highlighting how the negotiations with the spirits doesn't quite go right. She gets a result, but knows coming out of it that it wasn't the perfect result, and just her own issues as an Avatar in terms of just how she deals with everything. That would be nice with her. Roku, I think it would be nice to just see some of the missions that he went on as the Avatar that aren't just dealing with Sozin. Because there has to be some of that stuff. So he did his full-on training that we know of. Like he's probably the Avatar that we know about who just, his training seemingly went the smoothest that we've almost heard about of any Avatar. But there are big jumps in time during the Avatar and the Fire Lord where clearly he wasn't just doing training. So I'd like to see some other sort of issue that Roku had to deal with. Just to present some times of like Roku was successful as an Avatar. And so that the one thing we primarily know him as, his failure with Sozin, isn't just his one defining trait. I'd like to see more positivity for Roku. Avatar Salai, I think you have a lot of room with that character to cover. He's one of the greats, but with him, they don't even say specifically why he was great. Like we know all about the treaties and stuff like that with Yangchen, but with Salai, it's just he's great because he was great and he was kind of like Yangchen. But, you know, tell us some of the specifics on that character. I think that's ground to tell a story. And the fact that like he was mentioned in the Kyoshi novels, I almost feel like if FCE was to write another book, that potentially it would be a Salai novel maybe. As Zito, again, I think with the way they told his story, like Roku, they've told us probably the core main event from his life. Anything else would just be another story that is just him solving a more minor issue, but I think people would like to see that. What was he like when maybe he had to be more action focused? Just show us that there was that other element to the character as well. What was he like when the diplomacy and the bureaucracy wasn't going to work and he had to get his his bending out to deal with stuff? And then the Hundun Avatar. One, please name the character. That would be nice. And then I don't even think you have to necessarily show just this exact event, but just, you know, just cover who this person is. So I don't know whether that was something like you need to full and tell a story about, or just if you ever do an encyclopedia, name that character at some point. But that's the way I'd cover a lot of those other avatars that, like, you know, people might want a novel about. But yeah, short story kind of collection, like an anthology style book, or yeah, maybe one novel, maybe a shorter novel, depending on which avatar it is, would I think be good. Just because I don't think the situation we want with the novels is just that they feel like they have to be forever locked to the avatars who are connected to Aang or Korra. So they are the modern avatars where we know the line all in a row. We're like, you know, we don't want it to just be like, we know exactly how it's going to work. We got Kyoshi novels, so we're going to get Roku novels, and we're going to get Yangchen novels, and, you know, we don't want it to be that simple. Like, we want to see that the novels can do different stuff, and then maybe we'll get the other avatars covered later on. Number 7 on my list is heavy lore, including the origin of the line turtles, motivations, and their dynamic with spirits. And basically the idea of this is that I would like to see an Avatar novel that just goes super, super heavy into the lore. probably the biggest lore topic is it's moved from being what is the origin of the Avatar. We know that now. What's the deal with the Line Turtles? So maybe some sort of a book from their perspective. It would have to be, I suppose, really pretty heavy, high fantasy. And I'd like to see a different style of book with potentially spirits and Line Turtles as your main characters, and just really cover just what's going on there during that era. Just cover the whole, what are the Line Turtles? Why did they protect humans? And why are they considered ancient ones by spirits? They are just such an interesting topic that I would love to see a book just really go into the details and that sort of stuff. And just as a group, why they do what they do. But yeah, that's one where it's so speculative. There's not too much to discuss. But for me, I'm super into the lore, so I'd absolutely love that. 8 is a non-Avatar focused story. So it is a thing within this franchise that for the most part, everything sort of has to be related to an Avatar. ATLA, it's focused all around Aang. Legend of Korra is focused all around Korra. The Kyoshi novels are, of course, focused around Kyoshi. And most suggestions that people have for stories usually is about, what about this Avatar here, or that Avatar there, or Zito, or Kuruk, and so on. What about stories that don't involve the Avatar? And I think this is where, again, the novels can come in, good again. That I would really like to see how this would work. Whether it be you focus on a non-bender character or a bender from some nation. They come to meet a group of other characters and they just have their own journey together. Maybe the Avatar makes like a cameo appearance at some point in the story. But the Avatar is not the focus of the story, like, at all. In any way. That, of course, the Avatar is always going to be an important part of this franchise. We can address who the Avatar is during that era, but to the characters of the story, that character is treated as being this legendary character. Like that, it is a huge event if they come across that Avatar. So the focus is not that the Avatar is our main character who we know, but the Avatar is this celebrity figure to this group. And I really want to see how that would work, where you have just more normal people and you're not dealing with the fate of the world at stake, but are dealing with more minor issues, and maybe an issue builds up enough to where the Avatar has to get involved. But then in this case, rather than we always typically get it from the Avatar has to come in and deal with two groups of people at odds, switch to perspective around, and suddenly our focused characters are seeing the Avatar come in to deal with their issue, and they're trying to fight to get the Avatar on their side, and the Avatar tries to be neutral, but oh no, you're being too fair to that side, not fair enough to us. That sort of approach I think would be very, very cool to see. And I don't know, just again for the future of the franchise, I like just the idea of a unique era, not connected to anything, just a story where you commit to telling a pretty long story, so like a 2, 3, 4 book series that just isn't really about an Avatar. I think is also important that we can do stuff in this franchise without everything always having to come back to the Avatar. Number 9 is going to be a more specific topic, sort of like the Nomad Genocide, but this time how the Southern Water Tribe formed. So we know the gist of this. Yeah, you get it in like a book like this. So let me get the page here. Originally, the southern and northern tribes lived as one at the North Pole. Following civil unrest, a group of warriors, waterbenders, and healers left to start a new tribe at the South Pole. From that time on, the two tribes evolved very differently. So, very basic, just like, okay, there's unrest between the North and the South, and we roughly know why that is. It's because the North has all their traditions that not everyone agrees with. But tell the story about that. There has to be more personal issues at play. What were the people that actually left, the first Southern Water Tribe people? What was their core issue with the North? How did the North handle the fact that there was a whole group of people wanting to leave? And the fact that this ultimately creates tensions and a gap between the two tribes forever, that they're on complete opposite sides of the world. And the the sort of tensions between the two tribes sort of waxes and wanes over the course of the series. And it's only in Korra's era at the end of book 2 that the South finally achieves full independence. Otherwise, there's still always some connection to the North. I would love to see that story. To just cover, again, like, does the Avatar of that era get involved in the dispute between people? When, obviously, they would hear about a group of people from the North want to leave. And then if we cover that group of, like, do they know just inherently that there is a similar location down south? Or do they have to really explore to find that? And I'd love to know the specifics of that. Of like, maybe, you know, they were just told, like, as waterbenders, we need to live up here. But there's no other place in the world apart from the North that's like that. But then they maybe hear some legend about, like, oh, some airbenders found this place or something like that. And, you know, how do they know about the South? Because obviously they come there and they populate it themselves, highlighting that before then it was not populated. So, you know, there's a story there for sure. And just, especially because the cultures end up being so different. Okay, the people that form the South are going to disagree with a lot of the traditions there. But the South, you would have to say, is the more tribal of the two water tribes compared to the North. And that's part of the dynamic that I get into in, like, North and South. The comic is the North almost treating the South as savages because they are more of that sort of warrior or hunting style people, rather than necessarily what the North sort of end up being. They still have that, but they're almost sort of like more aristocratic in that way compared to the more simplistic, in a way, more rural South. So I'd like to see how that actually comes about. And again, there's room for a story. Your Avatar is probably not going to be the absolute focus character here, but instead your main characters would, I suppose, effectively be the person who becomes, I suppose, the first, you know, quote unquote, you know, unofficial chief of the South. You'd have your, obviously, northern characters who is the chief of the North at this point, and, you know, getting across that idea. That's a good option. And you can do this sort of stuff as it goes forward. Like, I suppose another similar idea, it's not my number 10, would be stuff like, we know Bossing Say, like, the walls had to be built before it was an underground place. Tells the story about, like, the formation of Bossing Say as its sort of upper tier iteration, and how that came to be, and so on. But number 10, final one here, is a story focused on the spirits. And this is similar to the point I made earlier on about a heavy lore topic involving the line turtles. But what I mean by this, and you could set this wherever you want, like you could set it in Korra's era now that the spirits are back in the world. You could set it just entirely in the spirit world, so it could be during any era. Or again, it can be set pre-beginnings or during beginnings at some point. But the idea is that your main characters are all spirits. So the humans are sort of the other species in this story, not humans typically encountering spirits, but this time spirits as they deal with humans. And I think this would be good just to get the perspective of a spirit, how they think. There'd have to be a lot of thought that goes into this to present how different they are as beings compared to humans, but also where the similarities are. And I think this would finally help to bridge that gap that we sort of have right now between the presentation of humans versus the presentation of spirits. And I think to do that, you need to characterize spirits properly. Treat them as actual characters, and not just basically, you are a spirit, therefore you need to be respected because we said so, which is typically the dynamic that we have with them. And again, that's part of why Beginnings works so well, is that the dynamic, is the simple dynamic between, like, Wan and Ai, and the fact that it's a human and a spirit and they can talk to each other. And look what they achieved. That doesn't happen that much in the franchise. So that's why I would like to see some sort of a story with the spirits. And again, depending on where you set it, during the Korra era, you can maybe have it be spirits who want to be friendly with humans, but finding the right humans to talk to. Earlier on, I suppose more of the idea, I suppose, in the spirit of what I'm really talking about here, is, you know, a story involving spirits set in the spirit world, where we get across what are what is the society of the spirit world, if there is any? What is the structure? What is the hierarchy? We know that the sort of smaller spirits seem to refer to Rava and Vatu as like the all-powerful spirits. But do they treat, say, like Tui and Law as being the same? What way do they view, say, someone like Glowworm or Ko? Are they considered powerful spirits? And so on. What would a Heibai be considered as? Because he's sort of powerful, but not the most powerful spirit. Same goes for someone like Wan Shi Tong. Finding out more about that hierarchy of spirits by just like, maybe your group features like a more mid-range spirit and then a lower spirit, one that's more like, you know, one of the ones that looks like a plant or a vegetable or something like that. But then you also have a Heibai-like spirit involved with this group, and they have to go to meet with one of the all-powerful spirits. And just how exactly does that all work? And we address, you know, their views on humans and so on. And I think that's just be very interesting, and maybe cover that idea of like, why do certain spirits want to leave the spirit world and come to the physical world, and really cover that whole idea of like, are they truly stagnant as we think and inability to change, and that's why they like the physical world, because it does change quite a lot. There's so many options to tell stories with that, and just because especially just that dynamic there. Spirits who talk, spirits who are characters. There's very few characters who fit that bill. In the sense that there is, like, Ko talks, I think like Enma says one or two words, Rava Vatu of course talk, Ai of course is a character, is a spirit, the dragon eel spirit talks, Glowworm can talk. You have spirits who do talk, but how many of them would you properly say are like characters as such? And it's like, okay, yeah, Glowworm, yeah, Rava, you know, through her interactions with Wan, definitely feels more like a character. Ai probably feels in a way like almost the most human as a spirit character, the most able to have a conversation with. But then you also have those spirits who are very much, oh yeah, that is the spirit personality, like the dragon eel spirit, where it's very much just like, humans are bad, spirits are good, let us do what we want, that type of thing. So that would be a very important story to tell. So, final rundown here is number 1, Kyoshi novels. Number 2, a unique era. The main suggestion here would be like an ancient avatar, one of the first 5 or 6 avatars, as like your third pillar mainline novel series. That is just really your big series that you go for. Number 3 is Nomad Genocide. Number 4 would be the Red Lotus / White Lotus backstory. 5 would be the Iroh backstory. 6 is sort of just general stories involving the other avatars like Kuruk, Yangchen, Roku, Salai, Zito, and the Hundun avatar. 7 would be a heavy lore-focused story, potentially a Lion Turtle story. 8 would be just a story that focuses on human characters who are not the avatar, and that the avatar potentially doesn't play that much of a role in the story at all. 9 would be how the Southern Water Tribe formed from the north. And 10, the last one here, is some sort of story with the spirits as the main characters. So they're my ideas for future novels. And in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on my ideas. And of course, some of these were the same as suggestions by Cash D's, who suggested this topic through Patreon. And let me know, just let's start a discussion about future novel ideas, because we're sort of waiting to see what they do. We have a sense that they probably will do more novels, but we don't know when that's going to be. But because Mike and Brian are not working on the live action show anymore, it feels like, okay, there's more time for them to work on novels if they announce more. I think this is a good time to have this discussion about what are the core stories that we really want to be told. So let's get this discussion going in the comments. But yeah, I'll just end by once again saying that, like I said, this topic was suggested from Patreon by one of my new patrons, Cash D's. You too can suggest a topic for me to cover in one of these upcoming Avatar discussion topic videos by joining my Patreon at the $5 tier. You immediately get to choose a topic that I will do as a discussion. That's like the main reward. In addition to that, you get access to the Patreon exclusive videos that I put up. Typically it's like 1 a month, but sometimes I'll put up more than that. But there's a few little benefits there, but the main one, of course, is the video suggestion, which this is one of them. So yeah, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.